Jonathan Stone adjusted his black tie as he sat in the back of his Bentley, staring through the tinted windows at the funeral home ahead. At 45, he was no stranger to funerals, especially those tied to business obligations. As the CEO of Stone Enterprises, he had built his empire from the ground up, and attending events like this was part of the job. But today felt different. The autumn wind carried a chill, rustling the golden leaves across the pavement as he stepped out of his car. Around him, luxury vehicles filled the parking lot, a testament to the influence of Richard Wilson, a longtime board member of his company. Jonathan barely knew the man on a personal level, but appearances mattered. He had learned long ago that success wasn't just about making money, it was about being seen in the right places, with the right people. As he walked through the heavy doors of the funeral home, he was met with the quiet murmur of conversations. The scent of fresh-cut lilies lingered in the air. He nodded politely at familiar faces, signing the guest book before making his way toward the casket. And then he saw her. Standing near an arrangement of white roses was Victoria, the woman he had once loved, the woman he had married right after college. He hadn't seen her in 15 years. She looked different, yet the same. Her dark skin glowed softly under the dim lights, and her hair, once long, was now cut stylishly around her face. She carried herself with quiet grace, but there was something else, a tension in her shoulders, a glance over her shoulder as if she were ready to run. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. He had spent years convincing himself that their marriage had been a mistake, that Victoria had been weak for leaving him. She had claimed she couldn't endure his long work hours, his relentless ambition. And yet, standing there, she looked anything but weak. Then he saw the boy. A teenager, around 14, stood beside Victoria. Light brown skin, sharp features, the same piercing eyes that stared back at Jonathan from his own mirror every morning. The resemblance was undeniable. The boy scrolled through his phone, his posture straight, his expression impatient, just like Jonathan had been at that age. Jonathan felt as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. His mind raced. He did the math. Victoria had left 15 years ago. The boy was 14. It was impossible. His hands tightened around the back of a chair to steady himself as a wave of dizziness hit him. "This can't be real," he whispered under his breath. The boy glanced up, sensing Jonathan's gaze. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the teenager's expression, from boredom to curiosity. He nudged Victoria, whispering something. She stiffened, turning swiftly to grab the boy's arm, her movements urgent. Jonathan's voice came out before he could stop himself. "Victoria." She froze for a second, but then pulled the boy toward the exit. Jonathan surged forward, weaving through the crowded room, bumping into mourners as he tried to reach them. By the time he pushed through the side doors, he caught only a glimpse of Victoria's car speeding away. Jonathan stood frozen, heart pounding. He had spent his life building wealth, ensuring no detail in his empire went unnoticed. Yet, somehow, he had missed this, his own son. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone. "Janet," he said when his assistant answered. "Find out everything about Victoria Hale, where she lives, where she works, and the school her son goes to. I want every detail." Hanging up, he clenched the steering wheel as he sat back in his car. He didn't know how or why Victoria had kept his son from him, but one thing was clear: this secret would not remain hidden any longer. Victoria gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white as she drove through the quiet streets of their small city. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear the hum of the car engine. She knew this day would come, the day Jonathan Stone would find out about Ethan. Beside her, her son sat in silence, staring out the window. Ethan was a smart boy, too smart for his own good sometimes. He had noticed the way she rushed them out of the funeral, the fear in her voice when she told him to buckle up. Now, he was waiting for answers. Finally, he broke the silence. "Mom, who was that man at the funeral? The one who called your name?" Victoria swallowed hard. "Ethan, honey, there's something I need to tell you." Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious. He had always been a deep thinker, asking questions most kids wouldn't. And now, looking into his sharp eyes, the same piercing gaze as Jonathan's, she knew there was no turning back. She pulled into their apartment parking lot, turned off the engine, and exhaled slowly. The weight of 14 years of secrecy pressed down on her. "That man," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "That man is Jonathan Stone." Ethan frowned. "Jonathan Stone? The CEO of Stone Enterprises?" His voice carried disbelief. He had read about Jonathan in business magazines, seen his name on the news. "What does he have to do with us?" Victoria's throat tightened. "Ethan, he's your father." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan blinked, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. "My father? But you told me he died before I was born." Victoria looked down at her hands. "I lied," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did it to protect you, to protect both of us." Ethan's jaw clenched. "From what?" Victoria sighed. "From a life where you would always come second to a man who only cared about his work. When I married Jonathan, he was ambitious, driven, and relentless. I tried to be patient, hoping that one day he would put his family before his company, but that day never came. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I couldn't raise a child in that world. So I left." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his posture. "So you just decided for both of us? You never gave him a chance?" Victoria's chest ached. "I did what I thought was best. I didn't want you to grow up in the shadow of his empire. I wanted you to have a normal childhood." Before Ethan could respond, the phone rang. Victoria hesitated before picking it up. "Hello?" "Victoria, it's David Patton." The voice on the other end was familiar, an old colleague from her law firm. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue, but Jonathan Stone just hired our firm. He's looking into his parental rights." Victoria's breath caught. "How did he find out so fast?" "You know Jonathan," David said. "He doesn't waste time. He's already filed for an emergency hearing." The phone nearly slipped from her grip. She had spent years hiding, keeping Ethan safe from Jonathan's world, and in less than an hour, everything was unraveling. Across the room, Ethan had pulled out his phone. His face paled as he scrolled through search results. "Mom," he said, his voice shaky. "He's worth over $500 million. Victoria sat down on the couch, exhaustion washing over her. "Jonathan Stone isn't just your father, Ethan. He's the man who made me choose between my career and my marriage. He worked 20-hour days, missed every important moment, and expected me to just wait. I knew nothing would change, even after you were born." Ethan's expression softened, but his voice held a note of betrayal. "But did you ever think that maybe he deserved to know? That maybe I deserved to know?" Before Victoria could respond, the doorbell rang, making them both freeze. She peeked through the peephole and felt a chill run down her spine. Two men in expensive suits stood outside. One of them held a briefcase, the other a folder with Stone Enterprises embossed in gold lettering. A firm knock followed. "Miss Hale," one of them called. "We're from Stone Enterprises. Mr. Stone would like to speak with you." Victoria turned to Ethan, her pulse racing. "Go to your room and lock the door. Don't come out until I say so." "Mom," Ethan protested, standing his ground. "I'm not a kid anymore. I want to meet him." Victoria's voice was urgent. "Ethan, please. You don't understand what Jonathan is capable of." But before she could stop him, Ethan strode toward the door and swung it open. The two lawyers looked at him, their eyes widening. One of them quickly spoke into a phone. "Mr. Stone, we're here. You should come right away." Victoria felt her world spinning out of control. For 14 years, she had worked tirelessly to keep Ethan out of Jonathan's grasp. Now, as she looked at her son, so much like his father in ways that terrified her, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Jonathan Stone sat in the back of his Bentley, gripping his phone as his legal team outlined his next steps. His pulse pounded as he stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. He had spent his life negotiating billion-dollar deals, outmaneuvering corporate rivals, and building an empire from the ground up. But now, he faced the most personal battle of his life, claiming his son. Across town, Victoria paced the small living room of their apartment, her thoughts racing. Ethan sat on the couch, staring at his phone, the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on him. He had always wondered about his father, but now that the truth was out, he wasn't sure how to feel. The phone buzzed again. Victoria hesitated before answering. "Victoria," David Patton's voice came through, calm but firm. "Jonathan isn't wasting any time. He's filed for an emergency hearing. He wants joint custody and full legal rights as Ethan's father." She closed her eyes. "How soon?" "Tomorrow morning," David replied. 9 o'clock sharp. Victoria's stomach turned. Jonathan hadn't even given her a chance to explain, to prepare Ethan for this. But that was just who he was, direct, ruthless, always in control. She hung up and turned to Ethan. He looked up, sensing her hesitation. "Mom," he said cautiously. "What's going on?" Victoria took a deep breath. "Jonathan is taking me to court. He wants custody." Ethan frowned, running a hand through his hair. "So, what? He just found out I exist and now he thinks he can take over?" Victoria sat beside him. Jonathan has never been the type to accept things halfway. When he wants something, he takes it. And right now, he wants you. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I don't even know him." Victoria swallowed hard. "I know. And that's my fault." Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "What do you want me to do?" Before she could answer, there was another knock at the door. She braced herself before opening it. 2 men in suits stood outside, but before they could speak, another car pulled up to the curb. A sleek black Bentley. Jonathan stepped out. Dressed in a dark suit, he adjusted his tie, a habit Victoria remembered well. His sharp eyes locked onto hers before shifting to Ethan. The air between them was thick with tension. "Ethan," Jonathan said, his voice calmer than she expected. "Can we talk?" Ethan hesitated, looking at his mother. "It's okay," she whispered, though her heart ached. Ethan stepped outside, standing a few feet away from his father. Jonathan studied him, taking in the details, the way he stood, the way he fidgeted with his phone, the way his eyes held the same sharpness Jonathan saw in the mirror every morning. "I never knew about you," Jonathan said, his voice quieter than before. "Your mother, she never told me." Ethan crossed his arms. "And now that you know, you're just going to drag us into court?" Jonathan exhaled slowly. I don't want to fight your mother, Ethan. But I lost 14 years. I don't want to lose another day. Ethan shifted, uncertainty in his posture. So what happens now? Jonathan glanced at Victoria before answering. I want you to come with me. Spend some time at my home. Get to know me. No pressure, just time. Ethan hesitated, then asked, and what if I say no? Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Then we'll figure something else out. But I'd rather you make a decision after you've seen both sides. Victoria stepped forward. Jonathan, you can't just. But Ethan cut her off. I'll go. Victoria's breath caught. Ethan. I need to see for myself, Ethan said, his voice steady. I've spent my whole life wondering about him. I can't do that anymore. Jonathan's eyes softened. I'll have my driver pick you up in the morning. Ethan turned back to Victoria. Mom, it's just a visit. She nodded, even though every part of her wanted to say no. Be careful. Jonathan gave her a look, one that wasn't just about the court case or their past. It was something deeper. Something unresolved. 9 a.m., he said simply before turning back to his car. Victoria watched them go, her heart heavy. The battle had begun, but she wasn't just fighting for custody. She was fighting for her son's heart. The next morning, as promised, a sleek black Bentley pulled up outside Victoria's modest apartment complex. Ethan stood at the window, his heart pounding in his chest. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with questions. What was his father really like? What kind of life had his mother walked away from? Victoria stood behind him, her arms crossed, concern etched into her face. You don't have to do this, Ethan, she said softly. Ethan turned to her. I know, Mom. But I need to see for myself. A knock at the door made them both jump. When Victoria opened it, a man in a dark suit gave a polite nod. Mr. Stone is expecting Ethan. Ethan grabbed his backpack and hesitated for just a moment before stepping forward. Victoria touched his arm. Call me if you need anything, she whispered. I will, Ethan promised before stepping outside. The ride through the city was quiet, the driver focusing on the road as Ethan stared out the window. The closer they got to the towering skyline of downtown, the more the landscape changed. Modest homes gave way to upscale townhouses, then to soaring glass skyscrapers. Finally, they arrived at an ultra-modern high-rise with a private elevator leading to the penthouse. The doors opened to reveal a breathtaking space, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, sleek furniture, and a grand piano in the corner. Ethan felt small in the vastness of it all. Jonathan stood by the window, a cup of coffee in hand, dressed in another perfectly tailored suit. He turned and smiled. Welcome, Ethan. Ethan shifted awkwardly. This place is huge. Jonathan chuckled. It is. But you'll get used to it. A staff member appeared at Ethan's side. Your room is ready, sir. We've stocked it with anything you might need. Ethan blinked. I have a room. Jonathan gestured down the hall. Of course. If you're going to be part of my life, I want you to feel at home here. Curious, Ethan walked down the hallway and pushed open the door. His jaw dropped. The room was massive, easily 3 times the size of his bedroom at home. A brand new gaming setup sat on a sleek black desk, and a walk-in closet was already filled with designer clothes in his size. On the bed was a brand new laptop, still in its box. Ethan turned to Jonathan, who had followed him inside. How did you know my size? Jonathan smirked. I pay attention to details. It's how I built my company." Ethan ran his fingers over the laptop box, feeling overwhelmed. "Mom always buys my stuff from discount stores." Jonathan's expression darkened slightly. "That's going to change. You don't have to settle for less anymore." Ethan frowned. "Mom doesn't settle. She just works hard for what we have." Jonathan exhaled, as if choosing his words carefully. "I respect that. But now, you have options." That afternoon, Jonathan took Ethan on a tour of Stone Enterprises. The towering headquarters was like something out of a movie: glass walls, marble floors, employees moving with purpose. Jonathan introduced Ethan to his executive team, each of them shaking his hand, treating him like a young heir to the empire. Ethan listened as his father explained business strategies, mergers, and investments. He had never thought much about corporate life, but hearing Jonathan speak, he couldn't deny that it was impressive. At the end of the tour, they entered the company's private dining room, where a chef had prepared a lavish meal. As they ate, Jonathan studied Ethan. "You have my determination," he said. "I see it in the way you carry yourself." Ethan looked up. "I don't know if I want to be a businessman." Jonathan shrugged. "That's okay. You don't have to decide today. But I want you to see what's possible." That evening, as the sun set over the city, Jonathan led Ethan to the rooftop. The skyline stretched out before them, the lights twinkling like stars. "This is your heritage," Jonathan said. "Stone Enterprises. Everything I've built, it could be yours one day." Ethan hesitated. "What if I don't want it?" Jonathan smirked. "Then we'll find something else. But I want you to have the choice." Ethan's phone buzzed. It was a text from his mom. "Are you okay?" He typed back quickly. "Yeah. Just a lot to take in." Jonathan glanced at the screen. "You can talk to her, you know. I'm not here to take you away from her. But I also won't let her keep you from me anymore." Ethan looked out at the city, his thoughts swirling. His whole life, it had just been him and his mom. Now, he was caught between two worlds, one of love and sacrifice, the other of wealth and power. For the first time, he wasn't sure where he truly belonged. The morning of the custody hearing arrived sooner than Victoria had hoped. The city skyline loomed in the distance as the black sedan Jonathan had sent pulled up outside her modest apartment. She hesitated before stepping inside, gripping her purse tightly. Ethan had spent the last 2 nights at Jonathan's penthouse, and though he had texted her frequently, she could sense the excitement in his words. He was dazzled by his father's world, the luxury, the power, the endless opportunities Jonathan laid before him like stepping stones to a future she had never imagined. But Victoria knew Jonathan Stone well. She knew how persuasive he could be, how he viewed the world in terms of wins and losses. And now, she feared, he saw their son as something to be claimed, a victory he had been denied for too long. The car pulled up in front of the courthouse, where reporters were already gathered, cameras flashing as she stepped out. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked forward. Inside, she spotted Ethan sitting beside Jonathan. Her son was wearing a suit, one that had undoubtedly been tailored just for him. He looked older, more polished, but when he saw her, his face softened. "Mom," Ethan said, standing up. She pulled him into a tight hug, ignoring the watchful eyes of Jonathan's legal team. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, it's just a lot." Victoria pulled back and cupped his face. "No matter what happens in there, I love you. You hear me?" Ethan nodded again, but before he could respond, Jonathan's lawyer called them into the courtroom. The judge, an older woman with a no-nonsense expression, took her seat. "Let's get to the heart of the matter," she said, scanning the documents before her. "Mr. Stone, you are petitioning for joint custody of Ethan Hale, arguing that you were not informed of his existence until recently. Ms. Hale, you have raised him on your own and argue that his stability is at risk if the court grants custody to his father. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Victoria said firmly. Jonathan's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, Mr. Stone is a respected businessman, a pillar of the community. The idea that he would be unfit as a parent simply because he was unaware of his son is absurd. He is more than capable of providing for Ethan in ways that Ms. Hale cannot." Victoria clenched her fists. Providing financially is not the same as being a parent. The judge turned to her. "Ms. Hale, can you explain why you never informed Mr. Stone about his son?" Victoria took a steadying breath. "I left Jonathan when I was pregnant because he was consumed by his work. He wasn't present. He barely noticed me, let alone the idea of a family. I knew that if I told him, he would try to control everything. I wanted Ethan to have a childhood free from pressure and expectations." Jonathan, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "You never gave me the chance," he said, his gaze locked onto hers. "I understand why you left, Victoria. But you had no right to keep my son from me." Victoria turned to Ethan. His expression was conflicted, torn between them. "Your Honor," Jonathan continued, "I am not the man Victoria remembers. I built my business for my family, not instead of them. I want to be in my son's life, and I will fight for that right." The judge considered his words before speaking. "Ethan, do you have anything to say?" Ethan swallowed hard. "I love my mom. She's done everything for me. But I want to know my dad too. I don't want to have to choose." Victoria's heart ached. The judge sighed. "Given the circumstances, I am granting joint custody. Mr. Stone, you will have scheduled visitation, and any major decisions regarding Ethan's education and future must be made jointly." Jonathan nodded. Victoria felt the room spin around her. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed around them. "Mr. Stone, how do you feel about today's decision?" One called. Jonathan placed a protective hand on Ethan's shoulder. "This is about my son. It's not about winning or losing. It's about family." Victoria studied him carefully. For the first time, she wondered if Jonathan truly meant it. As they walked toward their separate cars, Ethan turned to her. "Mom, are you okay?" She forced a smile. "I'll be fine." But deep down, she wasn't so sure. Jonathan Stone had just won a place in their son's life. And she wasn't sure she could stop him from taking more. The weeks after the custody ruling passed in a blur. Ethan now spent part of his time at Jonathan's penthouse, immersing himself in the world his father had built. Victoria watched from a distance, trying to balance her fears with the reality that her son needed to figure things out for himself. Jonathan, true to his nature, wasted no time introducing Ethan to his world. The boy was now riding in private cars, attending high-profile business meetings, and wearing clothes that cost more than Victoria's monthly rent. She could see the changes in him, the way he stood taller, the way he spoke with a newfound confidence. It wasn't all bad, but it was fast. Too fast. One evening, as Victoria prepared dinner in their small kitchen, her phone buzzed. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," she answered, wiping her hands on a towel. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Ethan's voice sounded distant, almost hesitant. I just wanted to let you know I'm staying at Dad's tonight. Victoria's chest tightened. You were supposed to come home today. I know, but Dad wants to show me something tomorrow at Stone Enterprises, he explained. He says it's important. Victoria exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. Ethan, we agreed on a schedule for a reason. I know, he repeated, sounding almost guilty. But, can't we be flexible? Victoria closed her eyes. Fine. But call me before bed, okay? I will. Thanks, Mom. She hung up, staring at her phone. The feeling in her gut was unmistakable. She was losing him, little by little. The next morning, Jonathan led Ethan through the top floor of Stone Enterprises. The entire office hummed with energy, executives in suits moving with purpose, assistants on headsets, stock numbers flashing on massive screens. Jonathan placed a hand on his son's shoulder. This could all be yours one day. Ethan looked around, overwhelmed but intrigued. I don't know if I'm ready for something like this. Jonathan chuckled. You don't have to be. Not yet. But it's never too early to start learning. He led Ethan into his office, where a stunning view of the city stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. A sleek desk sat in the center, and on it was a folder with Ethan's name embossed in gold. What's this? Ethan asked, picking it up. Jonathan leaned against the desk. An internship. A chance to work alongside me. No pressure, of course. But if you're interested, I'd like you to start getting hands-on experience. Ethan hesitated. Mom won't like this. Jonathan exhaled, his gaze steady. Your mother is a brilliant woman, but she doesn't see the bigger picture. I'm offering you a future. Choices. She gave you a good life, but I can give you something more. Ethan ran his fingers over the folder. I need to think about it. Jonathan nodded. Take your time. But don't be afraid of what you're capable of, Ethan. You're my son. You're meant for more. That night, Victoria sat at the kitchen table, staring at the clock. It was late, and Ethan still hadn't called. Her phone finally rang. Ethan, she answered quickly. I was getting worried. I'm sorry, he said. Dad and I were talking, and I lost track of time. Victoria bit her lip. What were you talking about? There was a pause. He offered me an internship. Her grip tightened around the phone. Ethan. I haven't decided yet, he added quickly. I don't know, Mom. Maybe he's right. Maybe I should start thinking about my future. Victoria took a deep breath. Sweetheart, I want you to have every opportunity in the world. But I also want you to remember who you are. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone, least of all your father. I know, Ethan said softly. I need to figure it out. Victoria felt her heart ache. She had raised him to be independent, to think for himself. But now, as he stood at the crossroads of two very different paths, she realized just how hard it was to let him go. Life often presents us with choices that shape our future in ways we never expect. Jonathan and Victoria's story reminds us that success is not measured by wealth or status, but by the relationships we nurture and the time we invest in those we love. For years, Jonathan built an empire but lost precious moments with his family. Victoria, in trying to protect her son, made a decision that kept him from knowing his father. In the end, both had to learn that love requires balance, between ambition and presence, between fear and trust. For those of us who have lived through decades of change, this story serves as a powerful reminder: Time is the one thing we can never get back, but we always have the chance to make the most of what remains. Whether it's reconnecting with family, mending broken relationships, or simply being present, it's never too late to choose love over pride, connection over isolation. The greatest legacy we leave behind isn't what we build, it's who we build it with.